Welcome back to Philosopherse podcast, where we explore the big questions of life and the thinkers who grapple with them. Today, we're diving deep into a classic debate that continues to shape our understanding of society and government, the social contract. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. The social contract is a fascinating concept that has captivated philosophers for centuries, and it's still relevant today. It's a concept that continues to be debated and reinterpreted in the ever-evolving landscape of political thought.
Absolutely. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is the social contract?
The social contract is a hypothetical agreement between individuals in a society establishing the rules and principles governing their interactions. It's not a literal historical event, but a philosophical construct used to explain the legitimacy of government and the obligations of citizens. Imagine a world without laws, where individuals are free to do whatever they want. That's the state of nature, and it's a pretty chaotic place. The social contract theory suggests that individuals voluntarily surrender some of their natural freedoms in exchange for the benefits of living in a society with laws and order. This surrender is necessary to avoid the chaos of the state of nature, where individuals are free to pursue their own interests without any constraints. The social contract, in essence, is a trade off individuals give up some freedom for the security and stability of a governed society.
That makes sense. But how do two prominent thinkers like Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau view this concept so differently?
That's where things get really interesting. Both Hobbes and Rousseau use the social contract to explain the origins of government, but their interpretations differ significantly. This difference stems from their contrasting views on human nature. Hobbes, writing in the aftermath of the English Civil War, believed that human beings are inherently selfish and driven by a desire for power. He saw the state of nature as a war of all against all, where individuals are constantly in conflict, driven by their self-interest and fear of death, leading to a lack of security. In this state, life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, as Hobbes famously wrote. To escape this chaos, individuals agreed to surrender their natural rights to a sovereign who has absolute power to enforce laws and maintain order. He believed that a strong, absolute sovereign is essential to prevent anarchy and ensure the survival of society.
Wow, that's a pretty bleak view of human nature. What about Rousseau?
Rousseau, writing during the Enlightenment, held a more optimistic view of human nature. He believed that human beings are inherently good, but corrupted by society. He saw the state of nature as a state of primitive innocence, where individuals are naturally free and equal, living in harmony with each other and nature. This state of nature is characterized by a natural sense of compassion and a lack of inherent conflict. However, society, with its institutions and inequalities, corrupts this natural goodness. Rousseau argued that the social contract should aim to create a society that preserves individual freedom and promotes the general will, which he saw as the collective interest of the people. He believed that the social contract should not be a surrender of individual rights, but a means of creating a society that is based on the consent of the governed and that protects individual freedom.
So Hobbes emphasizes order and security while Rousseau prioritizes freedom and the general will. That's quite a contrast. What are some of the key differences between their views on the role of government?
You've hit the nail on the head. Hobbes believed that the purpose of government is to maintain order and security, even if it means sacrificing individual freedom. He argued that the sovereign should have absolute power to enforce laws and maintain order, even if it means suppressing individual rights. Rousseau, on the other hand, believed that the purpose of government is to preserve individual freedom and promote the general will. He argued that government based on the consent of the governed is essential for a just and equitable society. He believed that the general will, representing the collective interest of the people, should guide government decisions.
It sounds like Hobbes's theory could lead to authoritarianism, while Rousseau's theory leans towards participatory democracy. What about the concept of the general will? That's a pretty complex idea. Could you explain a little more?
It is. Rousseau argued that the general will is the collective interest of the people, distinct from the sum of individual desires. It's not simply a majority vote, but a collective judgment that reflects the common good. Imagine a community deciding on a new park. A majority might prefer a basketball court, but the general will might favor a playground that benefits everyone, including children who can't play basketball. The general will represents the will of the people as a whole, rather than the sum of individual wills. However, critics argue that Rousseau's concept of the general will is vague and susceptible to manipulation. They argue that it can be used to justify the suppression of minority rights and the creation of a totalitarian state. It's a powerful concept that has been both praised and criticized for its potential to both empower and suppress individuals. The challenge lies in finding ways to ensure that the general will truly reflects the common good and does not become a tool for oppression.
That's a lot to think about. So, in conclusion, what are the main takeaways from this comparison of Hobbes and Rousseau?
The debate between Hobbes and Rousseau reflects a fundamental tension in political philosophy, the tension between order and freedom. Hobbes, with his pessimistic view of human nature, prioritizes order and security, even at the expense of individual freedom. Rousseau, with his more optimistic view of human nature, prioritizes freedom and argues that a just society must protect individual rights. This debate continues to resonate in contemporary political discourse as we grapple with issues such as the balance between security and privacy, the limits of government power, and the rights of individuals versus the needs of society.
This is a really important topic, and it's great to hear how these contrasting ideas continue to shape our political landscape today. Thank you so much for shedding light on this fascinating debate. It's clear that the ideas of Hobbes and Rousseau continue to be relevant and important today.
It's been a pleasure. And remember, as we navigate the complexities of our own societies, it's crucial to engage with these timeless questions and consider the different perspectives that have shaped our political landscape.
And before we go, let's take a moment to connect these ideas to current events. What are some examples of how the debate between Hobbes and Rousseau plays out in the world today?
That's a great question. We see this tension between order and freedom in many contemporary debates. For example, the debate over surveillance and privacy is very much rooted in this philosophical divide. Those who prioritize security might argue for increased surveillance to prevent terrorism, while those who prioritize freedom might argue that such measures infringe on individual rights. Another example is the debate over gun control. Those who prioritize order might argue for stricter gun control laws to reduce violence, while those who prioritize freedom might argue that such laws infringe on the Second Amendment right to bear arms. These are just a few examples of how the ideas of Hobbes and Rousseau continue to shape our political landscape today.
One last thing before we wrap up, you mentioned the general will being susceptible to manipulation. Could you elaborate on that a little more?
Certainly. One of the main criticisms of Rousseau's concept of the general will is that it can be easily manipulated by those in power. If the government or a powerful group can convince the people that a certain policy is in the general will, even if it's not in everyone's best interest, they can use that to justify their actions. This can lead to a situation where the majority, or even a powerful minority, can suppress the rights of others in the name of the general will. This is why it's so important to have a system of checks and balances in place to prevent the abuse of power and ensure that the general will truly reflect the common good. Think about historical examples like the rise of dictatorships, where leaders often claim to be acting in the general will of the people, even while they were suppressing dissent and consolidating power.
That's a really important point. It's a reminder that even the most well-intentioned ideas can be used for harmful purposes. Thank you for bringing that up.
You're welcome. It's always important to be critical of even the most seemingly noble ideas.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks again for joining us, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Philosopherse Podcast. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep thinking critically.